Afternoon. Um, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Ashley Beck, and I'm the moderator of our network. We arrange more or less on a quarterly basis briefing meetings of this kind, which are rather like webinars. I think when we started having brief meetings, nobody knew what a webinar was. But this is really how they've developed in recent years. So it's good to see you this afternoon. Our main speaker will be introducing one of our guests, I think this afternoon as well. Before we proceed, just to fill you in on how faith in Europe is developing, from next spring, we will be responsible for a small dedicated section of the quarterly journal known as the Pastoral Review, which is owned and published by the Tablet. And we'll once a year we'll have a section which will include material that we've produced as a network from these briefing meetings and from other sources within our membership, to give a higher profile to our network, to publicize our events, our briefing meetings. So I hope that you'll be able to have access to that by the spring. The first section will be in the April issue of the Pastoral Review. It's great to welcome Keith Jenkins this afternoon. Keith is the former General Secretary of the European Ecumenical Commission for Church and Society, EECCS. He was also, from 1999 to 2002, Associate General Secretary of KEC, the Church's European Network, and Director of its Church and Society Commission. He's been a committee member and trustee of Faith in Europe for more years than most of us could be able to remember. Keith, thank you very much for leading our session this afternoon on a figure who was, I suppose, rather better known in this country 40 odd years ago than he is now, Jacques Delors, who died fairly recently. And so it'll be good to learn more about him this afternoon. Keith, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you indeed, moderator. And I must apologise firstly for the fact that I'm having to do this on my phone rather than on my laptop because, as is common to many people, I've had problems with my laptop. Before embarking on what I have to say, I would mention two things. One is that we've been joined this afternoon by Frank-Dieter Fischbach, the relatively new General Secretary of the Conference of European Churches, and by Lawrence Hogebrink, who, like me, was present at what was described as a historic meeting between church leaders and the European Commission way back in 1990. I'll say more about that at the moment. Secondly, can I just mention my sources for what I'm saying today? One of them is totally fallible, it's my memory, but that is backed up by a book which was written by Lawrence Hogebrink called A Soul and A Heart and Soul for Europe, which was a record of the meeting between church leaders and the European Commission in 1990. And it's still available on Amazon for the princely sum of £6.76. Or you can also download an electronic copy free of charge from globeethics.net. So there's that. There is also Jacques Delors' own memoirs, which are only published in French, but that is also available. And there is a book which I have drawn on by Charles Grant called Delors, The House That Jacques Built. Anyway, with those commercials at the beginning, what I'd like to do today is first to outline briefly Jacques Delors' history and thinking before he became president of the European Commission. Secondly, I want to look at some of the achievements of his presidency of the European Commission. And thirdly, to look specifically at his interactions with churches and other religious communities. Before doing that, though, I would like to take as my starting point that meeting to which I have referred to in November 1990, not long after I started work as General Secretary of the European Ecumenical Commission for Church and Society. Sometime before my appointment, the then Archbishop of Canterbury, Robert Runcie, and Bishop Martin Kruse, the president of the Council of the Protestant Church in Germany, had agreed that they should make a visit to the European Commission as matters dealt with by the at the European community level were becoming much more important in their respective countries. And this idea expanded to include other members' bodies of EECS, and EECS was asked to take care of the arrangements for the visit, work undertaken by my former colleague in EECS, the late Mark Lenders. Thus, on the 5th of November 1990, a group of 12 church leaders from 8 countries, Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, and the UK, came to the Berlaymont building in Brussels, accompanied by Klaus Kremkau, the president of EECS, and Cloney Roberts van Berkel, its vice president, together with Mark Lenders, Barney Milligan, who was then the Anglican representative in Strasbourg, and myself. We spent the whole of that day in meetings with a number of commissioners and senior commission officials, culminating in a meeting with Jacques Delors. And I'll return to that meeting later on. So to turn to Jacques Delors, he was born in Paris in 1925 and began his working life on the staff of the Banque de France. He was born and brought up as a Catholic and was active in Catholic youth organizations, remaining a practicing Catholic throughout his life. It was well known that the relationship between his faith and his work were important to him, as well as a commitment to Catholic social teaching. He was also strongly influenced by the ideas of the French philosopher Emmanuel Mounier, who elaborated a school of thought known as personalism. This aims at a middle way between communism, which denies the individual, and liberalism, which denies the community. Delors himself defined personalism thus: I believe the individual is a person and not only an individual, a person who cannot be reduced to other people, and that this person cannot live without participating in communities which bind him to people. This led him to 3 criticisms of French society. First, a political culture based on an overmighty state and social groups which did not negotiate with one another. Second, excessive individualism shown in the struggle for social standing and consumer goods. And third, the inability of a capitalist society to provide equal opportunities and to humanize the way people treat each other. This shows itself in much of Delors' actions throughout his life, including his tenure of the Commission presidency. For a long time, he found it difficult to identify with a political party. In the immediate post-war period, he was attracted by the Christian Democrat Mouvement Républicain Populaire, the MRP, but became disenchanted by their participation in right-wing coalitions. So instead, he became involved in the Confédération Française des Travailleurs Chrétiens, the Catholic trade union, and the journal of a reform group within the union called Reconstruction. It led to an interest in other trade unions in Europe and also a job with the Commissariat du Plan, the organ of French economic planning. In turn, this led to him becoming an advisor to Prime Minister Jacques Delors, where he brought collective bargaining into the public sector industries, starting with Électricité de France and Gaz de France, and the Loi Delors, which guaranteed lifelong training for French workers. Eventually, when François Mitterrand founded the Parti Socialiste in 1974, Delors did join it, although not without some difficulty, because some members of his local branch objected to his involvement with the Chaban-Delmas administration. He was elected to the European Parliament in 1979, his only election apart from a brief period as mayor of the Parisian suburb of Clichy. The victory of François Mitterrand in the 1981 presidential election brought Jacques Delors to office as the Minister for Finance and Economics. His tenure was overshadowed by economic and currency problems, which forced him to advocate a pause in social policies. He secured a clear acceptance of the market economy and an alignment with European social democracy. Crucially, he held the line on France's membership of the European monetary system, giving priority to monetary stability over spending. This brings us to 1984 and his appointment at the end of the year as president of the European Commission. When he was appointed, the EEC had been drifting rudderless for several years. But the first issue taken up during his presidency was the creation of the single market, implementing free movement of goods, services, labour, and capital between member states. The project had existed before Delors' arrival, but having toured the capitals of member states, he found that achieving the single market was the one project that had the unanimous support from the governments. Thus, he took up the issue and achieved agreement that measures to complete the market should be in place and operative by 1992. Delors was very active in promoting what was called the European Single Act of 1987 and in overcoming the objections of one Margaret Thatcher to any treaty changes, especially to agreeing to the use of the qualified majority voting in the Council of Ministers on matters relating to the single market. Thus, the single market, although never totally achieved, became and remains one of the legacies of Delors' presidency. Alongside the single market, Delors brought to the presidency his concern for working conditions and solidarity with the poor, something which he regretted not having been able to do more on during his tenure as Minister of Finance and Economics in President Mitterrand's cabinet. Early in the presidency, he had set out to get the ETUC and UNICE, the European Community-Wide Trade Union and Employers organisations talking together in the hope that they would negotiate EC-wide collective agreements. He was disappointed by the lack of significant achievements, and so in 1989, the Commission, at his instance, proposed a European Social Charter to set out workers' rights. After several months of negotiations between member states, the Charter was watered down in an unsuccessful attempt to overcome the objections of Margaret Thatcher. For example, it ended up saying nothing about the minimum wage or restrictions on working hours. Thus, at the end of 1989, 11 of the 12 member states signed up for a non-binding social charter. But this was not the end of the story. The Commission pushed for the social charter to be incorporated into the Treaty of Maastricht, which was being negotiated during 1991 and 92. Again, fierce opposition from the UK, where the move towards the European social dimension was a major factor in building up Euroscepticism in the Conservative Party, and coincidentally, enthusiasm for European involvement in the trade unions and the Labour Party. The issue came to a head in the last days of the negotiations for Maastricht. Delors was fearful that the UK, if the new UK negotiated an opt-out for from the social chapter of the treaty, it would open the door in future to other member states seeking opt-outs from major developments. Eventually, Delors proposed an opt-in by which the 11 other member states agreed a protocol under which they adopted the social chapter, made it legally binding, improved its content, and it was agreed that the institutions and procedures of the European Community would be used to operate the social chapter without the involvement of the UK. This persisted until the Treaty of Amsterdam in 1997, when the newly elected Labour government agreed to the incorporation of the social chapter into the treaty as a whole. And thus the social element of Europe became part of Delors' legacy. In 1988, the question of a single currency, dormant since the 1970s, came under discussion once more. The member states accepted a proposal by Delors that he should chair a committee, which came to be known as the Delors Committee, to evolve a plan for the single currency. The committee, made up of the 12 heads of national central banks, plus a few others, duly reported, and their conclusions were fed into the process leading to the Treaty of Maastricht, which set out the process by which the euro would come into being. In virtual form on the 1st of January 1999, with banknotes and coins circulating from the 1st of January 2002. Put like this, it seems a smooth process of introduction, but there were many battles along the way, particularly the efforts which Delors had to make to persuade Chancellor Kohl to give up the Deutschmark. And so the euro was yet another part of Delors' legacy. Earlier, I left unfinished the meeting between church leaders from Aix and the European Commission of 1990. It's time to return to that for the final legacy of Delors. Jacques Delors opened the meeting pointing to the fact of two factors then motivating European integration: the never again desire to avoid European war and seek reconciliation, and secondly, the desire not to accept the decline of Europe's industries, resulting in economic growth and more jobs. But that was not all that was needed. He said that, and I quote from Lawrence Hogenbrink's account, compared with Japan and the USA, for the European model was the permanent quest for a balance between flowering of the individual and solidarity between the constituent parts of society. This involved accepting all three elements in society: the market, state intervention, and involvement of citizens. People had to regain solidarity. This was not, he went on, the task of lawyers and economists as building a market had been, but one for philosophers and thinkers, including theologians. He invited the churches to join in this search for the meaning of European integration, to help Europe find the heart and soul it lacked. He saw it as a community spirit and a means of engaging European citizens with the process. This meeting set two streams in motion. One was for the churches to contribute to the search for meaning, which Delors felt was urgent and involved mobilizing citizens to contribute to the process. In a 1992 meeting with the president of the Council of the Protestant Church in Germany, he repeated the phrase, finding a heart and soul, and added that if we hadn't done that within 10 years, the game would be up. It's a matter of debate whether 30 years later, Europe is anywhere nearer finding a heart and soul. And if it hasn't, is the game up? There have been various attempts since the 1990s to involve citizens in a process of relaunching or rethinking Europe, notably one involving civil society organizations in the Convention on the Future of Europe, and involving civil society and citizens at large in the Conference on the Future of Europe in the teens. Keck was very actively engaged in the first process, initially through myself and my colleague Peter Pavlovich, and later my successor Rudiger Noll, again alongside Peter Pavlovich. And Faith in Europe contributed to a small item to the second through the consultation, which we organized in 2016 or 17. These processes never really caught, in my judgment, the imagination of citizens at large, and appeared to do little or nothing to stem the rise of nationalist populism in member states with its hostility towards European integration. Delors' Soul of Europe legacy in this regard is somewhat meagre. The other consequence was that Delors committed the Commission in the 1990 meeting to regular informal meetings with churches, and he agreed to designate specific civil servants to organize such meetings. From this seed grew not only the series of dialogue meetings and seminars, which Eakes and Keck have pursued alongside Comesse, our Roman Catholic partner, but also from this seed grew not only those meetings, but eventually the commitment to open, regular and transparent dialogue between the EU institutions at large and churches and faith communities enshrined in Article 13 of the Lisbon Treaty. I believe that Delors and his term as president of the Commission have left a significant legacy: the single market, the social dimension, the euro, and structured dialogues with churches and faith communities. Where the legacy is lacking is that it has not developed a narrative of European integration that appeals to and engages Europe's citizens. More than 10 years have passed, is it too late to develop that vision, to give Europe that heart and soul? That is my summary of the history, but we have also wanted to turn to the present and to see where we are in terms of Delors' legacy. And to that end, we've invited Frank-Dieter Fischbach, the recently appointed General Secretary of the Conference of European Churches, to join us. I would now introduce him and pass the word to him. I recall that I first met Frank-Dieter back in the 1990s when he was serving his vicariat before ordination, a sort of apprenticeship, I suppose you could say, working in the office of the Protestant Church in Germany. And he then departed into various jobs within the EKD, but returns to Brussels now as General Secretary of KEC. And so, Frank-Dieter, I pass the word to you.
Thank you, Keith, and welcome, Frank-Dieter. It's a great privilege for you to be able to join us today. Thank you very much, Keith.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you also for inviting me to this meeting, to this exchange, and I'm really looking very much forward to also then the exchange afterwards, because it's true that I have started here now on 1st of July this year, so you cannot expect too much from myself now as input on that, and on that full picture that Keith has now brought to our awareness again. And I can only try, or what I would like to do, let's say it like this. What I like to do is to raise perhaps 3 points and points reflecting a little bit on what Keith has developed, how to pick up today on this legacy of Delors, but more in questioning of analysis, let's say, not questioning what Keith had said, but questioning of what is happening today and on analysis for today, and inviting then you about your observations, reflections, and also questioning how churches can work on that today. 3 points. The first one, a little bit extended, which is not in a direct way, but I think one can say indirectly mirroring the legacy of Delors when it comes to this point that you have made, Keith, the single market, the social dimension, the euro, structured dialogue with churches. That will be again another point where we are with this legacy, which is absolutely fundamental and still until today, with the common market and all what is that about, and the euro, of course. In the crisis we have seen in Europe, in the European Union over the last years, starting with the financial crisis, and then also coming to the crisis of how do we deal, what can be a European policy on migration, and all with these critical questions then also coming up about the European Union, until the end also of leaving the United Kingdom, taking the decision to leave the European Union. At that time, so in the years 2010 onwards or 28 onwards, we had in the European Union another person who was also not as Jacques Delors, but I think still remarkable also as somebody who reflected a lot about the European Union. And that was the former president of the Prime Minister of Belgium, who became then from 2009 to 2014 the president of the Council of the European Union, Mr. Van Rompuy. And Mr. Van Rompuy was given the Charlemagne Prize in 2014 in Aachen. You know perhaps this prize, which is given every year. And it was given to him as somebody who was really convinced about the European Union and did a lot to develop further on the European Union and also to shift through the different crises of the European Union at that time. And he has given a speech there in Aachen on the 29th May 2014. And I would like to give a quotation of this, not a very, very long one, where I think we can find a mirror about the Delors legacy to a certain point, and where he plays with the wording of space and place, which is needed in Europe. And I will quote it now and afterwards make some few remarks so that it gets more clear, perhaps what I'm thinking about and why I think it is an important reflection. So the quotation is this one. With Europe, the focus has always been on space. From the very start, the typical action was to remove borders for goods, workers, investment, to let people and companies move, take initiatives, seize opportunities. Even today, 2014, on fields as diverse as energy, telecom, or the digital economy, it is still about bringing down borders, creating this big common space. But we've never really thought of Europe as a home, a shelter. And today we pay a price for it. Europe, the great opener of opportunities, is now perceived by many as an unwelcome intruder. The friend of freedom and space is seen a threat to protection and place. We need to get the balance right. It is essential for the Union to be also on the protecting side. It is urgent for the Union not to be seen as only benefiting business, but also employees, not only the movers, but also the stayers, not only those with diplomas and language skills, but all citizens. And people not only as consumers who like cheap products and a wide choice, but also as workers who can see in others competitors for their jobs. Stop of the quotation. Europe as a space which has not as much as needed reflected that for the citizen it is also important to see as a place for them to live in. This is not, as far as I understand, a critic to Delors and the common market, because Delors had also put in the question of the social dimension of Europe, which is about being a place for the people in the common space of Europe. But it is the critic that this area or this dimension is lacking in the European project as it is developed so far. And I think this is also true until now already, still. And I would like to add two observations to this first point. As far as I remember, but Keith and also Lawrence, please correct me if I got it wrong, because I was not able to look it up in the internet or on documents. In the late 90s, there was in France a prime minister, Jospin, who was, I think, even from Protestant background, as far as I remember, also relating to the Socialist Party, so working also with Mitterrand. And he made a speech about Europe at that time where he expressed Europe must be the project how to shape for the Europeans globalization. And globalization not only as a global market and that Europe is a part with this common market, a part of competition and the global market, but how to set this common market as a part of the global market in a shape that it is a space secured for the Europeans to live in. And to put on Van Rompuy's words, to be also a place to live in with a social dimension. So how to develop Europe also with a social dimension in a globalized world and a globalized market. And the interesting thing at this moment was that a German philosopher and a sociologist, Habermas, who was very prominent and has shaped the German discussion very much at the 19th and even beyond the 90s. He's now also in his 90s of age. He has developed this idea in a small booklet the same time to think about the European Union as a project for the citizens to take part in the globalized world, but in a shaped way that take into account the need, the necessity of a social policy in Europe. Yeah, to shape the market in a social way, in a way of social policy, in this way that Delors said social dimension, to guarantee, to secure the place of the people, let's say, this place of citoyens in Europe in this common market. So to balance it, the place and the space, as Van Rompuy has said that. A last point to this first point, it is for this very interesting with the new now commission, which is not still in place. They are now working on that and discussing, and it is done a lot behind the scene for the moment here in Brussels. And we are all waiting, let's say, for the decisions by the European Parliament in the coming days. But it is very interesting that von der Leyen, when she did her speech in the European Parliament to be elected, at the first point was about competitiveness in Europe. And the second point was about security. But this is not about security in the sense of the place of the persons and social security, let's say, and social policy. It is now speaking here in Brussels about security like cybersecurity, security and migration, security and the international threats, security and the wars around and in Europe, Ukraine, and so on. So it is a very different understanding of security. What does it mean at this stage then in this social dimension, what was Delors' wording or what was a wording by Van Rompuy and then also Jospin or Habermas. Although von der Leyen is of course an interesting figure, because she comes, and that would be now interesting, Keith, you have done so a lot about Delors and also how he has grown up and what the philosophy is. And unfortunately, I cannot deliver something about that for Ms. von der Leyen, although it would be interesting to know. I mean, I don't know if you know, she comes from a very Protestant family background of Lower Saxonia. Her father was the Prime Minister of Lower Saxony, Ernst Albrecht, and he was for some times also here in Brussels, also working in the European Commission. And if I got it right, also from the book of Win Burton, about together with Mark Lenders, Ernst Albrecht took part in some meetings here in this house with X, or the organization with its name, which became later the European Ecumenical Church and Society Commission. So there are links, even personal links, but I cannot say too much about it. One would have to investigate a little bit more about this, how much that really resonates with von der Leyen. So what I want to express first is that I think that with this von Rompuy analysis, which I find quite still today very interesting, have to have a place in Europe, in this space of Europe. It resonates with the legacy of Delors, what Keith has explained about the single market, social dimension, the euro. And we see that what is lacking in the development is the social dimension. And I think this is still true today. And perhaps in our discussion, we can go later on a little bit more about that. The second point, but now I will be shorter, is a little bit the question about the narrative. I think it is very true that it is worthwhile, especially for us as churches, but also for others, of course. But now starting with us as churches, to speak about Europe and what is the meaning of it. So soul and heart might be the picture, the wording about that. Nevertheless, and here I now come with questions. Nevertheless, I would ask, is it really possible to have one narrative about something like Europe? How will this emerge? That cannot be stipulated, that cannot become from up downwards. It has to be emerged in a certain way that there is this narrative. And I would like just to give you one example how difficult it is. In Germany, we have this discussion now that we say, or some sociologists say, well, yes, Germany is united between West and East, but we have two different realities also in society in Germany, speaking about Germany, because the narratives speaking about Germany from Western and East is still different. And it has even become a little bit more somehow different over the last years than we thought it was before. So my question to our round here for later on for discussion is, of course, we have to think as churches about a meaningful Europe and how do we speak about it. But is it really possible to have one narrative, or can we also speak here aloud? Can we speak also a little bit about unity in diversity? Also in this way, speaking about Europe and different narratives which goes into this unity of Europe. And another remark also is about this narrative issue and the question of meaningfulness. I think Europe is also a political project. And of course, people will react on this political project about how successful it is. So how did it deal with the financial crisis? How did it deal with the question of migration? And even if you take now just a very, very small issue, which is not very, very important, but nevertheless, since several years, we are speaking in Europe about handling with summertime, and that there shall be taken a decision about that it has to be changed. And we are here in Brussels, let's say, not able to make it a brave and a clear and a reasonable decision about that. And then, of course, people will start to think, well, what is this Europe about, or this political project about, if it is not possible to make decisions about this kind of question? This is also just a question mark about how does people perceive Europe as a political project and decision-making in Europe when it comes to this kind of questions, and they perceive, well, it seems to be very difficult that decisions are taken. Just a question mark also. Last point, of course, to the dialogue with the churches. Just there, I would like to inform you just only where we are for the moment. And then, of course, this is also then for discussion. Peter Pavlovich, always who has a long-standing experience with this, as my colleague here, still here also in the General Secretariat of the Conference of European Churches in Brussels, he always says, and I find that very, very interesting, that he says somehow we are a sacrifice of the success of this dialogue. Because we had this dialogue meetings over a long range of years, with very often, not always perhaps, but with high quality of speakers, of bringing in people from our churches, from academics, to the meetings with civil servants of the European Commission on the topics which was agreed together to speak about, which was started with this Delors meeting, and afterwards was said, yes, we do that. And you can read that in this really wonderful book of Lawrence, and you can follow that there. But then, of course, because of this Article 17, other religions, but also other groups of non-confessional groups asked to have the same meetings. And at the beginning also then the Commission started to have this kind of meetings. But then what we observed is that then it became much more difficult, and the Commission somehow, without discussing it openly with us, as far as I know, decided, well, we have to get it down a little bit. It is too much, or I don't know. Now we are at that point that we have a meeting of the European Commission with high religious leader meeting, which is just a meeting for some few hours in the morning, and at the end with a nice photo with high religious leaders and the Commission leaders, or some of them. And then we have in the European Parliament, we will have that now also in December, a meeting as a dialogue meeting on a topic. It will now be in December on intergenerational fairness and policies. But also there, it is not only with the churches and other religions, like representatives of the Muslim community and the Jewish community, but also with other non-confessional organizations, like also the what are the Freemasons organizations, and so on, which gives the whole discussion in the room and the presentations a very different flavor and color. And we are working on it also towards a new commission. And I will have also now a meeting with the Vice President of the European Parliament, who is responsible for this Article 17, to put it in place. And I will also try to make the point there, to make clear that the dialogue with the churches, and it might be also with religions, other religions, is a different one than with non-confessional organizations, and that one should at least from time to time make there a difference about it. You all also do not put always employer organizations and employee organizations always together and discuss with them the same issues, who make differences, because it is meaningful to make their differences, discussions on certain themes. And I think this is also still true. So what I want to share with you is that we have a change and development on this area of dialogue with churches and religious communities, which is not on the same high level as it was at that time after the Delors meeting, and was then for several years. And Keith, you could speak, I think you can give a lot of good examples how this dialogue went at that time. But that has really changed, and we try to work, or not we try, we work on that, to make attempts to get it again a little bit in a different style than it is now. But I cannot promise that we will reach that goal. Perhaps this 3 lines, you see, it is more question marks also. It is really very new idea, not new ideas, but I'm still new now in this position and try to highlight a little bit what it is about. And it might be that you are absolutely not satisfied with this input about the presence of the dialogue and our work. And I would really like to invite you to come in with all remarks, questions, proposals that I will learn from this exchange with you. Thank you very much for this possibility, for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank-Dieter, for that contribution. I think it's very easy when you're speaking of the past to be very clear and firm, but clearly when we're speaking of the present and even more of the future, you are right to raise a number of question marks and to ask which is the direction should we go. Now, I'm not the only person here this afternoon who was present at the Delors meeting in 1990, but Lawrence Hogebrink, who wrote the book The Heart and Soul of Europe, is also with us. And before throwing the meeting open to everybody, I would like to ask Lawrence if he wants to add anything to what has been said before. Do you, Lawrence?
Yes, please.
That's good. Welcome.
I have some comments to the introduction by Keith, which you gave me the first draft of it. And I also would like to address some points that Frank-Dieter just made. And I'm happy to see several familiar faces whom I have not seen for a long time. First, in addition to what Keith already said about the meeting in November 1990, I would like to say something about the timing of that meeting, because that was very important. It was just in between, first, the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, followed by the end of communism. And second, the forthcoming agreement on the Treaty of Maastricht in December 1991, which would settle the reforms which have already been described by Keith, which would turn the European community into the European Union, and well, with all the new tasks, etc., which was a complete success, but the thing which we experienced all was, of course, the one currency, the euro. Not you, Keith, but most of us on the continent. But the fact that it was just between those two important events meant that suddenly the discussion, also the discussion we had to address, was changed, because this reform of the institutions and giving it more competences, etc., was called deepening, strengthening these structures. And suddenly we also had to talk about what to do and what would be the wishes of the new states in Central and Eastern Europe, which had been liberated themselves from communist rule. So, and that was called widening or enlargement. And this whole discussion about deepening or widening was one of the big things we had to address at that time. And the churches our church delegation were strongly in favor of doing both. And several government leaders were quite hesitant about enlargement. They thought that would take a long time, or it wasn't desirable at all. One exception was Margaret Thatcher. She liked widening because she thought that that would weaken and damage the deepening process. It was rather opportunistic. Anyway, the whole thing came as a full surprise, of course, to all of us. And I think it has become relevant again because, well, of course, the enlargement has taken place to a large extent, but there are still countries knocking on the door, or not really knocking on the door, but we would like to integrate them into the European Union, because otherwise China or Russia will be in charge of these countries. A big problem is, of course, Ukraine, and I'm glad that these issues get some attention, but I'm not clear where KEK stands at the moment and how much effort is put into this, and if there's any contact with the churches in the countries involved by this. So that's one addition and one question also. I've prepared a lot of comments, but I will select only 3. I have a big, my second remark is that I have huge files of its unfinished business of analyzing the official encounters between the church's ecumenical delegations and delegations of the European institutions. That includes, of course, the dialogue meetings that Keith mentioned. It also includes the biannual meetings with the incoming presidency. The last one, probably you were present already, Frank-Dieter, was with the Hungarian government, with the Prime Minister and some other members of the government, to discuss what are the priorities. And I think that is really a very important new development. And I hope that it is about more than repeating the values which we have always been addressing, etc. And well, I'm very glad that this still continues, and I'm not sure. I think that's only the churches. That's not with other similar organizations of faith or even the Masonry people. But I have also the attention that the dialogue as such, but Frank-Dieter just explained that has less attention now than it was in the past. And I think it is not only because of the success, as Peter Pavlovich said. I think there was simply also, under the 2 previous general secretaries of KEK, there was simply less interest in it. They were more inside looking and less interested in the political project Europe, which you addressed, Frank-Dieter. I also think that there is some tradition of KEK which we should not forget, and it is that KEK for many years was not at all interested in European integration. On the contrary, it was against it. KEK was a bridge, tried to be a bridge between the churches in East and West, and did that well. I think it was involved in human rights issues, etc. But European integration was seen as a Western project parallel to NATO, and it was simply impossible to address it. And that negative attitude towards European integration lasted until 1992. I have checked that. And when you look at the website of KEK now, it seems as if KEK has been has been responsible for all the work that EECS and the Church and Society Commission have done. They are not even mentioned. So I think KEK should look a little bit more critical at its own past in terms of the European integration. My final remark is that I've seen a shift in the dialogue. In those first years, we had a lot of talks about, let's say, in French, the finalité. What is the purpose? What is it about, the European project? And of course, that was not only about widening and deepening. It was also what is the narrative? What is the future? Do we want a Europe with different speeds but one direction? Or a core Europe with rounded circles, with opt-outs, etc., all those kind of things. So it was really about the political project Euro. And I think later the emphasis came more, no, right from the beginning, the emphasis was also on social issues. When I analyzed those 175 meetings, which I've looked at, the most prominent issue is the social question: unemployment, poverty, inequality, also later the ecological dimension of all of this. That must be said, but there was much more emphasis than later on what is the European project about, and basically that was the question of Delors. So I think the churches in a later stage have almost forgotten what Delors asked, and I very much hope that Frank-Dieter will restore this, also based on his own experience. We had in that time, as Keith will remember, a working group on political and economic union, and that was basically the think tank of X. And we always had speakers from the European institutions at assemblies or at assemblies or the and of course the annual plenary meetings. Several times we had the president of the European Commission as a speaker, as a keynote speaker, and I think that even in Tallinn, the last General Assembly, there was not even somebody invited from the European institutions. So you see a shift there, which I believe really must be restored, and which is not only the result of the success in terms of that all the other religious and non-confessional organizations have joined, which indeed is a big problem, I think. May I make one final remark? That is that the discussion about Europe itself has been a discussion in those years, the 90s, basically about a limited dimension of Europe, that is how to strengthen the European Union, enlargement, etc. But it was not a discussion about Europe as a whole. The last discussion we have had in Europe about the future, the last real serious discussion about the future of Europe has been in the late 60s and the early 70s, with the Harmel report, NATO, with Germany getting the permission to engage in its detente policy, and with the Helsinki agreements in 1975. There has been no discussion about Europe like that since then. We missed the opportunity in the 1990s, and it is understandable because indeed we were busy with deepening and widening of the European Union. We were busy with the Gulf War, we were busy with the wars in the former Yugoslavia, etc. But this kind of fundamental discussion, how do we reorganize Europe as a whole, has lacked. And I would like to remind us that in that next year it will be 50 years ago that the Helsinki agreements were signed, and so that will be an opportunity. This commemoration of 50 years Helsinki to take a look at what we want with Europe as a whole. Of course, the issue with Ukraine is the core issue at the moment, and I'm happy that Pathways to Peace program is focusing on that. But I think we really need to try to develop the kind of discussion which we had 50 years ago again. Thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence. And thank you to both our speakers, one from the Netherlands, one from a German working in Brussels, for your contribution today. But I think now it's time to hand the meeting back to you, Ashley, for some questions and discussion.
Thank you so much, all three of you. It's been really impressive. And as I said, it's been a great privilege to welcome Frank-Dieter and Lawrence this afternoon to really expert input together with our own Keith Jenkins. I think we've learned a lot, not only about Delors himself, but about the current state of play in Brussels, which even for those of us in the churches, it's easy now to feel cut off from because of you know what. So it's really been good. If I could start the ball rolling, when I was researching some stuff quite a long time ago now, I remember reading somewhere that Delors was sometimes given a rather hard time because of his committed Catholicism by others in both in French political life and possibly European circles. Was this true? Was he seen as slightly odd because he was religious by this stage, or is that just an over-embellishment? Any of you, really?
I think it's, if I may say so, I think that it is true that Delors had a certain amount of criticism from others, but I think there was also a recognition of his very considerable skills as a negotiator,
Right.
and as someone who understood the need to try to bring about consensus, but at the same time, someone who was capable of drawing red lines and not letting people pass them. I also get the feeling from reading biographical material about Delors that he was also he could also be quite sharp,
Right. Yes.
and could put people in their place, and he was also quite prone to temperament and anger at times. I don't for all his commitment to Catholicism, I don't see anybody making a case for sainthood as they do for Robert Schumann.
Yes, indeed. I've not picked that up either. Is there anything either of our other speakers would like to add to this? I mean, I don't know. It's quite a long time ago, isn't it now? Okay. Any other questions at this point? You could either raise a hand or speak up.
I've got a hand.
Grace, hello, welcome. Good to see you.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you so much for what you've told us. I just want to make one comment that I sometimes think we forget that two very powerful things are happening at once in Europe. One of them is persistent and ongoing secularization. I don't think there's any point in denying that. We are, all the statistics, I mean, they vary from country to country, but the trend's going in one way.
Yeah.
Our populations are becoming more secular. We are also becoming more diverse. And so kind of when you were speaking about the 1960s and 70s, I remember that quite well when I learned what I learned in the sociology of religion. And we were always taught that religion would drain from public life, but it would be retained in individual lives, in privately. Now, what I think is happening at the moment is that religion is draining from private lives, but it has returned to the public sphere, driven largely by the need to manage diversity. How do we accommodate people who are not from a Christian background into European societies? And how do we do this creatively, constructively? And what are, we're still searching for answers. We don't find this easy. And every now and again, there's a problematic issue and it all goes very unpleasant. And we argue a lot. And the fact that the two things are happening at once, I think, is important, because secularization doesn't only make us more secular. It means we lose the vocabulary and the capacity and the imagination to talk well about religion.
Yeah.
It's going from our consciousness at precisely the moment that we need it most. And I think this is why the current discussion, I often use the two words, it's both ill-informed and ill-mannered. And this is why I think some of the things that happened more spontaneously at an earlier stage are now proving extremely difficult now. And you hinted at this by saying, who do we include in our discussions? Do we, how extensive are our discussions about religion? It's clearly not only Christian people. It has to be other faith communities. But where do you stop and draw the line? Or who do you include and when? And those who come from the secular dimension, probably the European institutions, may well have very little capacity or inclination or vocabulary or understanding of what they're talking about. And I see this certainly in Britain, big time. I mean, I see it all over Europe in individual countries. I'm wondering, those of you who've been at the centre of Europe, at the institutions more than I have, or who are still there, whether you see the same kind of tendency.
Thank you very much, Grace. Would anybody like to comment from our speakers? It seems to me that another good example of how people with a purely secular mentality in this country, and I suspect probably now Western Europe, fail to understand enormous parts of the war in Ukraine because they're not aware or interested in the religious element or the religious background.
I think, please, Lawrence.
Yeah, I had to turn on my mic. No, I think that Ukraine is a very good example. Well, here in the Netherlands, we have organized some meetings about the religious situation in Ukraine. I think there is an inability in the World Council of Churches to understand what's going on. These efforts to have a dialogue between the Russian Orthodox Church and the churches in Ukraine, I think, is doomed to fail and naive. I don't know how much contact there is in the Pathways to Peace program now with the different churches. That's one point. My second point is that indeed religion, of course, has, because of secularization, etc., has diminished or has been much less present in the public life. And there is a tremendous problem of religious illiteracy among politicians, and they often have no idea what they are talking about. But I should also add that looking at ourselves, even in those early years, the interest of the churches in what we were doing, Keith, was quite limited. It was often individuals.
Yep.
I always tried to report back to meetings of X and those dialogue meetings, etc., to the Dutch Council of Churches and to some people in my own church. But there was not much interest. I think the most important thing that was going on in the churches in those years was the partnerships between local congregations in East and West. That was a quite massive phenomenon at the end of the Cold War. We counted 800 local congregations which had a partnership with the congregation in mostly in the GDR, but also in Hungary and Poland and Czechoslovakia, as it was still was. That was a kind of integration from below, which I think helped us to understand a lot about what was going on in the churches there. I'm missing that now. It has disappeared.
Yeah.
I'm sure many of us, at least in the UK, would attest that lack of interest in Europe among the churches is sadly alive. In fact, it's probably got worse since Brexit. Frank-Dieter.
Yeah. May I add just some information about the Ukraine and how Conference of European Churches for the moment is relating to the Ukraine and the war against Ukraine. But starting with, and that has nothing to do with Ukraine, that I can just say that as Lawrence, that this situation is still the same, that only few people are interested in, what are we really doing, and what do we try to do, and to get the results out of it, and that is still the same, or even perhaps even a little bit worse than at that times, because I have the impression that many of our churches are also in a crisis, and so they are looking much more inside and look how to restructure and so on. So ecumenical openness and also looking beyond is more difficult also for them, and it's also understandable in a certain way. So, but Ukraine, just a few words. So it's true that there's this Pathways to Peace program, and we always say that is a flagship for the moment. So it's a really where we put a lot of emphasis in, and indeed we are in contact with many of the churches in Ukraine. I don't know if I can say all because I do not know all of them, but the major churches. Also the two Orthodox churches, the old Catholic, the Greek Catholic Church, and some of the Protestant churches also. We were with a delegation visit in March in the Ukraine at different places, also for one day in Kiev, meeting also there. In Ukraine, there exists what is called an all-Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religions, not only churches, but churches and religions. And we've met them in Kiev. The Jewish community and the Muslim did not take part in that meeting for good reasons. I think it was more really a visit of KEK, the leadership of KEK or the delegation of KEK with these churches. But we've also met the main churches in single meetings to speak with them, and we keep up that contact. So we will have also now in December a European conference on the concept of just peace and what does it mean, the theology of just peace today with the war in Ukraine. And we hope very much, and it looks like that it will also work out, that we will have also participants from the Ukraine also telling us, and also from different churches there. Perhaps that the KEK, different from WCC, we have accepted as a member church this church, which is Orthodox Church relating to the Ecumenical Patriarchate, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. But we have also contacts with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, so this church who relates in a certain way, difficult to describe, and how it relates for the moment to the Moscow Patriarchate, so to the Russian Orthodox Church. And we try to keep up these contacts also in this conference there, and being in dialogue with them. That's also why we, also the Conference of European Churches, did not for the moment still did a statement about this Ukrainian law, about the legislation, how the state relates to religion and churches who are relating to the aggressor, and so on and so on. We will have the governing board meeting next week. We will have there on the agenda also this point. But I mean, I do not know how the governing board will then decide, of course, but our recommendation is to say something about that, but in dialogue with the churches. So not as a public statement as such, but in dialogue with the churches and how they also interpret the reality on the ground, and with this law, and to work in this direction. Yeah. That is perhaps for the moment. But please, if you have a question about this, I will try to answer. But I think that is for the moment perhaps what are the most important, is the most important development from Keck's side about it.
Thank you. And as you will know, very shortly after the legislation was announced in relation to the Orthodox churches under the Moscow Patriarchate, Pope Francis issued quite a strong criticism very quickly. Yes, I think a number of people, I'm sure many of us here, are trying to build up links with people in Ukraine. I have a visiting lecturer on one of my degree programs who is a researcher at the Catholic University of Ukraine in Lviv, and he's doing a session for me in 2 weeks' time. Dorothy, you have your hand up. You're mute. You need to unmute
yourself. Yes, I've unmuted, yes. Well, thank you very much for all the information and the background reminder. I became involved mainly in all this, particularly wider Europe in 1990, at that crucial time, meeting women at the Ecumenical Forum European Christian Women Assembly, when we suddenly had the influx.
Oh.
Dorothy, I think we've lost you completely.
Yeah.
She'll come back.
Just in between, just to mention that we also visited in this delegation visit this university in Lviv.
All right.
And also because there's also an ecumenical work strange in that, and we are very much also relating to this. Yeah.
Yes, I've met a couple of times the dean of the theology faculty, Father Yuri, at conferences in Rome. While we're waiting for Dorothy to reappear, can I just ask what might seem for some people rather an odd question, but it's something I picked up in what both you, Frank-Dieter, and I think Lawrence said. I don't want to fit into the stereotype of a Catholic priest, but I noticed that you both mentioned Freemasonry having a role in these negotiations, which I suspect surprised many people from the UK, because we've not seen the Freemasons in that sort of light.
No.
Is this sort of quite accepted, or is it recent? Or sorry, I'm just interested in
it. Win Burton or?
Oh, Win, yes, you're mute.
This was, in fact, one of the things specifically that Jacques Delors insisted on when he set up the original program called A Soul for Europe.
You're right.
insofar as he said, as a result of the dialogue and the meetings that Lawrence and others have talked about, yes, I want to have dialogue with the religions, but not just the Christian religion, because we are a diverse Europe. And that not also, but so also with the other religions that make up what is Europe today, and with the non-religious believers, the people who believe in something, but which is not categorized as such as the believers. And so the committee that was, or the council behind the Soul for Europe original program, consisted of 3 different Christian denominations, so a little bit overheavy in some ways. The Jewish community representative, the Muslim community representative, and the Freemason one, the humanists as they were called. And in fact, the whole thing was chaired by the humanists throughout, or in fact, I think most of the time, which was seen as a way of retaining a certain neutrality, if you like, or a certain balance. But I think also brought an impact, an input from another aspect on the heart and soul that we were trying to discover and to describe as being the innate reason or feeling for what Europe meant, if one could possibly do that, that would be found amongst such communities as that as well. I don't know, Lawrence, would you like to say something on that as well? No.
No, I don't think I have much to add. I know that you were very much involved yourself, Win, and also very much involved in the crisis which developed in the Soul for Europe program, and also in the internal well, different approaches by the humanists who were in the program. Some who would be very much anti-religious, and others who would be much more open. I don't know how much involvement there was from Jewish or Muslim side, but I believe that the interreligious dialogue was part of the projects which have been supported by the program. And well, at a certain moment it came to an end, but I think it was indeed another part of the legacy of Jacques Delors, and I'm glad you mentioned it.
Thank you. Dorothy, welcome back.
Oh, I'm sorry, my battery completely went in the other one. I've almost lost my train, but what I was going to, in addition to thanking you for sort of giving the history and reminding of those times, I wanted to say just that the women seem to be good at telling stories of what's happening, and that's really I've seen it in so many ways recently. For instance, with reporting on in Ukraine. I mean, people in our area, grassroots level, as it were, having Ukrainian families to stay and then going back, and then what happened to those families, it suddenly, to a wider community, means something. Now, I've seen that over the years that I've been working with the forum. I've heard so many stories, and my plea is with those in leadership to give us stories of positive things that are happening in the churches in Europe, but of the individual families who have their own religious background in different ways, as we discovered with our contact. And also we have a very good partnership with Germany, in the eastern part of Germany. And was it said today in the news or how that we're still that East and West is still a very different cultural area within the one country, and that really hit home again today through the stories and knowledge of our partnership in Germany. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Any other questions? David?
Yes, thank you. The last point from Dorothy's is interesting, and I think, right, no doubt, the Frank-Dieter has experience there of how different East and West Germany are, and it's not because of the post-war situation. It's historically the two parts of the country are, sorry, printer's going, are very different. I don't know whether he feels that that is important, but my main question was rather bureaucratic rather than sense. To what extent are the relations between the Commission on one side and the European Parliament on the other side, do they have the same links now with churches, Jews and Muslims, and the non-confessional organisations? Is it a similar formula now? The speaker earlier said that the Commission has downgraded the meetings with high religious leaders. Is that true? And well, we can't tell what the new Commission position will be. We're just a week or two too early to get any feel probably for that. But to what extent is there a similar formula on the way the Commission and the Parliament choose their dialogue partners? Thank you.
Thank you. Frank-Dieter, you want to say a bit more about that because you alluded to this earlier?
Yeah. I can try to do, although really I have also a little bit to observe it now because I'm just now new and the Commission just starts also now. So we will also see how the Commission in the future will be active on this and handle it. But as far as I understood also from my colleagues, the situation is for the moment the following one. We have a dialogue with the EU presidency, which changed every 6 months. So for the moment, as Lawrence has said, the Hungarian government or the Hungarian government has a lead. And we always seek, together with Commissary, to have a specific meeting with the presidency on their plans, what they will do in the 6 months and how to reflect it by the churches. And that is only a meeting with KEC and Commissary, so our Catholic partner here in Brussels. That we are still doing, that is ongoing. But of course, it is with every country, with every government, different also. And just to mention to you that with the Hungarian government, it was a special issue because the Orban government tries to keep a very warm relationship with the churches. And inviting us even several times. I was just now in Budapest for a conference about religion, Christianity, and the state, because he tries to play with the Christian card, let's say, as a Christian identity of Hungarian state and Europe against others, and we have to see how we be a little bit also reluctant to these invitations and how to deal with it. But the next one will be now with Poland, and in the second half of next year, it will be with Denmark. And we are going on in this process. And what we also will try now to do to put a little bit even more emphasis on that, because we said we do not want only to go there, but we also will invite our churches to come to Brussels at a certain moment in the year to be present also here in Brussels and to do something here, also with the Parliament, perhaps also with the Commission, and to give them also space and room here in Brussels and to work on these with these presidencies to make a little bit more out of it as churches here in Brussels. The second thing is the meeting with the invitations by the European Commission, and that is indeed brought down. So there are no dialogue seminars for the moment, as we had in the past, and on which Lawrence worked and made all this research on these meetings, on these dialogue seminars. There's only left this once a half year, I think, or even it's only once a year. This I'm not quite sure for the moment. A meeting with religious leaders. This is then, as far as I know, for the moment, without the non-confessional group. There's another meeting then with high representatives on non-confessional groups, so humanists, Masons, and so on. I'm not totally sure if I'm right here, but there's one meeting with the religious leaders where we also then provide names and invitations to this. Also, but there are also then Muslim, Jewish, sometimes also Hindu representatives, and so on. This is also to a certain theme, but it is more an exchange, and then, as I said, a group photo, and that it is. It is not at all this kind of dialogue seminar where we had at the beginning 3 sessions, 2 at the morning, 1 in the afternoon, with different aspects of discussion and so on. That is not at all this. That is more really high representatives and this kind of meeting. Right. And in the European Parliament, and that came later, I think, than the dialogue seminars with the European Commission. I don't know when that really started. That is now in the European Parliament that we have once or 2 times a year, a conference on a topic like, as I said now in December, about intergenerational fairness, intergenerational justice in the European Parliament, which is organized by the European Parliament under this Article 17. There is a person in charge. There's a small office in charge of that, together with the Vice President of the European Parliament. Interestingly, now it is no longer by the EPP. It is a person from Italy, the deputy Isabella Sperna. She's part of the Meloni party, so she is related to the group of European conservative and reformists. So the start of the far-right groups. We have now 3 in the parliament, far-right group, right-wings groups. She's in charge of it. And we will have this meeting now in December together with the humanists, Freemason groups, and so on, which will be in the afternoon of one day in December. I don't have it now here in front of me. And that is also a routine now, and that goes with us and will go on with the new European Parliament as far as we can see for the moment.
Thank you very much. David Thomas.
I was very interested when Frank-Dieter was talking about narratives and the variety of narratives that have been around in the European project over the years. It seems to me that one of the interesting things about the early years, inspired very much by the legacy of Jacques Delors, was that the narrative about Europe, about integration, particularly on the social front, was extremely progressive. I've done some work quite recently on Jürgen Habermas, whom you mentioned, who was initially very skeptical about the European Union and then began to warm to it and saw the integrationist perspectives for all they were worth. So we've shifted, I think, from a progressive narrative to a defensive narrative. And you see that in Ukraine, a security narrative vis-a-vis Russia. You see it in a defensive narrative from the south about migration. You see it in a defensive narrative that people are putting forward about jobs, about insecurity of jobs, particularly the financial crisis, increasing inequality, outsourcing, and we've seen tragically an earthquake of that in the United States within the last week. How people actually understand the world in which they're in has changed radically. And it seems to me that all our discussions about the way we relate to one another aren't the way that the majority of people in Europe now see Europe. They see it as a possibility for a bastion against enemies they perceive. Hence nationalist populism. I wonder what you feel about that.
Thank you, David.
Can I just add a PS to that? That I think within that frame that David has just outlined, Christianity becomes a part of the defensive narrative. It's weaponized to exclude rather than include.
Yes, that's very true.
Very much share that.
Yeah.
Keith, did you want to respond to that, because you had your hand up anyway?
It was not on this point, but I think there has always been a sense in which Europe defines itself against the other. I mean, if you go back into history, Europe, in a certain sense, was seen as the bastion against Islam, against the Turks, and in the there is a narrative associated with the early years of the Europe, what is now the European Union, was that of course it was a bastion against communism in the eastern part of Europe. So there's always been that tendency for there to be a narrative of Europe against. And of course, this you find at the heart of those who espouse the Fortress Europe philosophy, as Europe defending itself against people who are described as if they were barbarian hordes. You know, I don't at all subscribe to that kind of language, but it is there. And we tend not to have the possibility of framing another narrative, and I think this is where there's been a failure on the part of both the churches and the politicians, a failure to say Europe is indeed the source of peace, justice, and reconciliation, for want of a phrase. But we've never developed that.
Yes, that's true. Thank you, Keith. And we did look at some of this in January at our session with Hans Kunandi. Any other points or questions at this stage? Rebecca. Oh, sorry.
Alison, I think wanted
Alison first. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, Alison. I just wanted to. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yes.
Oh, great. I just wanted to say to Frank-Dieter hello, because I worked with him in 2018, a group that was responding to the International Labour Organization over digitalization. And we had an excellent meeting in the spring of 2018 in Berlin, and then with Komiche, which was marvelous, in November of that year. I know that Dieter, I want to say how glad I am to know that Frank-Dieter is now the General Secretary of KEC. And also, he was very good about drawing in younger people when he was in his previous role, when I was working along with them, of drawing younger people in to know about the workings of KEC, And I'm wondering, I have heard through a friend that there were some approaches to get young people in the churches of the West to write to young Russians. I should think that would probably be very difficult just at the moment. But I'm just wondering if there's any other plans to involve young people, because it is quite difficult sometimes within the churches to get young people thinking about things and wanting to act. Yeah.
Well, Rebecca might want to say something about this, because
Yeah.
we've been talking about this in Faith in Europe, and at our committee meeting this morning,
Yeah.
we learnt about an initiative that's being planned. Rebecca, do you want to say something for the benefit of...
Yeah, so, well, I was going to say before that, was connected to what a couple of other people have been saying, was that it feels like we are missing some kind of hopeful vision, and we kind of need some kind of influential or prophetic voices in Europe that we can pay attention to. And I was wondering if anybody knows of anybody whose voice is worth listening to at the moment, that is kind of promoting the narratives that we kind of want to hear, I guess, or that are challenging us, maybe. Because I guess I'm thinking if there's this vacuum that could be filled by narratives and voices that are really, really worrying, and that's already happening. And so I just wondered if there were people that are kind of, I don't know, rising in the ranks, or their voices are being heard, that are worth following within Europe. Maybe they're thinkers, philosophers, academics that we should have on our radar that we don't already.
Yeah.
And then also what Alison has said, Faith in Europe, we are developing a project where we're bringing young people from different countries and Britain to Brussels in the autumn next year.
That's good.
And we're thinking about ecumenicalism, and we're thinking about peace building, and we're thinking about faith in Europe, lots of big topics. And we have been in contact with Frank-Dieter and his office to hopefully
I'm sitting
connect
out
with
in
them.
the car.
Oh, it's a bit early.
Well,
Okay, okay, right,
as soon as
okay.
you finish. Yeah.
Okay, I'll be with you.
And we should hopefully have a connection with Keck when we go to Brussels, and also the Quaker Council of European Affairs, and hopefully some others as well. And we're connecting with, it's being co-organised with the World Student Christian Federation. And so we have this effort to try and enthuse young people around peace and Europe and faith. So we'll see. Hopefully that will be a really brilliant project. And if there's other opportunities that we could be made aware of, I guess over the next year, this is kind of where a lot of my attention's going. So if there's other opportunities for young people that we could be made aware of that are happening through Keck and others, then that would be really helpful to be aware of it. Yeah, I don't know if anyone's able to respond to my first question. That'd be lovely.
Yes, does anybody want to?
Yeah, sorry. I just read earlier today that at Cumberland Lodge, do you know what Cumberland Lodge is? Cumberland, well, never mind, just Google Cumberland Lodge. And they are working with Rising Voices Youth Perspectives on Political Engagement. And you might find kindred spirits there. I don't think it's quite so Europe focused as you might be, but it is about depolarizing politics and disagreeing well and all that kind of thing. And it is very much centered on youth.
Thank you very much. Richard, you had your hand up.
Trying to unmute. Just a tiny recollection. I was only in Brussels for a fairly short time, and it was a long time ago. But the faith talks with the Commission in the first at the early part of my time, was with a commission official whose name I've forgotten, but he exactly understood what we were on about, and therefore we were able to talk to him frankly and, as it were, get somewhere. Then the commission entirely changed, and we had people sent to talk to us who were there out of duty. They were sent to talk to us, and it was a sort of a dialogue of the death ensued. And that's the sort of secularization worry that comes, that mounts and mounts, I think, in the sense that, I mean, I say to some of the sort of more extreme Quakers, if Jesus hadn't existed, you wouldn't be here. Somehow, I mean, the faith concepts are still terribly important, and I hope someone picking up Rebecca's point about a fresh voice would have a little bit of that in tow as well.
Thank you. Any other points? I think we normally bind up at about 4, so we've got a bit more time. Lawrence. Yes, Lawrence, go ahead.
Yes, I had to turn on my mic. A quite different point. I think that we have already forgotten that quite recently there have been a few years in which the European Union was looked at in a much more positive way. That was the COVID or Corona crisis. The saying is never waste a good crisis, but it became clear to the member states that the European Union was absolutely needed in addressing this crisis, and some things happened that would not have happened without COVID or Corona. That is that competences in the field of health, for instance, were went to the Commission. Something similar happened with and of course the financial commitments which were made and the money which was created. There was a much more positive feeling about the European Commission and especially von der Leyen at that time. And the same, of course, happened with the Ukraine crisis. That money was created somehow. There is still difference of opinion of how to do that, but at least there was a lot of positive energy there, and I think we have almost forgotten that again. Just a remark.
I think some people are hoping that it might be rather rash that the election of Donald Trump will perhaps have a similar effect in Europe, that it might bring people together, it might revitalize what we're all about, it might indeed even bring the UK and the EU closer together. But the other danger is that it will strengthen the far right in Europe and in so yes, I think the jury's out, really. Yes. Dorothy.
No, I think people who know me know that I would mention Belarus if at all possible. And I'd say that after 25 years of close cooperation with friends and people in Belarus, at least we have two friends that are very different backgrounds who I'm still able to be in touch with. And but apart from that, and if anybody here really has any suggestions that would in the long run help these fearful people who are living in that country, I just say that's in my heart every day. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And it's important, I think, not to forget nations that we often don't hear about. One of my students who is training to be a deacon is an American who is living in Moldova,
Oh, yes.
which we have heard a bit about in the news here, but most people in England don't know anything about Moldova. And I'm getting him to write something for the journal which I edit about where they are in Moldova, where the churches fit in, and so on. He's part of the tiny Catholic community, but it is fascinating. A lot of it is very scary, really, but important that we give a voice to people.
Much. I thought of them when you spoke, Lawrence, about helping people in Eastern Europe, because I know from friends in Moldova what a lot it meant being linked to churches in the Netherlands, and through that we could also join together. Absolutely amazing people. Sorry.
Yes, that's important. Thank you very much. Before we wind up, I just want to say to people who aren't on the committee anymore of Faith in Europe, something about what we're planning for next year. And these are very tentative plans. We don't have a lot of dates yet, but some of you will know that a few weeks ago, this book was published in England, The Church, the Far Right, and the Claim to Christianity. Now, I'm hoping that we can arrange a briefing meeting to look a bit at what is explored in that book, because one of the contributors is Shanaz Banglawala, who used to be a Muslim representative on our committee. It's edited by a researcher in Oxford who teaches for me, and I know someone else who's contributed. So and there's a lot of data in the book from the Church of Sweden and the Church of Norway, giving an insight to the far right as it's developing, particularly in Norway. So we'll let people know as soon as something is arranged, so that you have the date. But we don't know date yet because we have to fit around people's diaries. But that's just an example of how we're trying to keep abreast of all that's going on in Europe. It really has been great, particularly to have Frank-Dieter and Lawrence with us this afternoon. I hope you can join us for future events for Faith in Europe. I think we all need this time to be aware of the encouragement we get from one another across the whole of Europe, and the strength that gives us. Rebecca, is there anything you need to add?
Oh, Keith, Scott.
Keith.
Yes, can I just mention, I think there are people here today who may remember my former colleague, Mark Lenders, who died earlier this year, aged 89. Mark was one of the pioneers of the European work in Brussels, the ecumenical work in Brussels. And a week before Mark died, Helmut von Verschuur, who had been at the foundation of an association of Christian civil servants, which cooperated with that ecumenical work on Europe, also died. And with the help of Keck, we are some of us are organizing a memorial to Helmut and Mark, to begin in Brussels on the 28th of November at 2:30 p.m. at the Ecumenical Centre. And if anybody is in Brussels at that time, they'd be very welcome to join us, but please let us know in advance, or it will be live streamed. And if you would like the link for that, please get in touch with me, and we can ensure that that gets it. That'll be the next time that Frank-Dieter and Lawrence and I will be together, but we'll be together in person, not online.
Thank you. And as November is the month when we remember people and pray for the holy souls, that's a good note on which to finish. Thank you. Thank you all very much indeed. And It's been great to have this session, and thank you particularly to Keith for coordinating everything and for sharing all this with us. And I hope that we've achieved something in terms of reminding people, reminding each other, and through disseminating what's been shared this afternoon, reminding others of the importance of the late Jacques Delors. And may he rest in peace. Thank you all very much. God bless.
Thank you. Bye.